it's ignored by people who don't really care about it. And that sucks. For those of us who are trying to build engagement and push pretty important material for our staff. For whatever reason, people ignore their training. They do it because they have to, and then they sit through the module and they click all of the right buttons to get the check mark so that they stop getting the emails, and then they forget everything that they learned 2 days later or whatever. And then we have to send more emails and get them to redo it. So why does that happen? I'm going to talk a little bit about my perspective on some of the reasoning for why people ignore that training or forget to do it or forget the stuff that they've learned. And I'm going to talk about some of my experience as an instructor here at NAIT on how to build engagement and how to get people interested in something that they don't necessarily have the background to fully comprehend or fully understand. Just as a note, a lot of my perspective on this stuff is anecdotal. It comes from my experience as an instructor here. And I don't know if this happens to you guys, but for whatever reason in my personal life, the people in my life tend to use me as a sounding board for why their IT departments suck. Every time I visit my parents, one of my mom's favorite topics of conversation is that her IT department is awful. And she asks if we train them intentionally to do stuff wrong or whatever it is. Or every time my wife comes home having done a new cybersecurity training thing, she talks about how, oh, doesn't everybody know this? You don't click on the links in your emails. Why do I still have to do all of these training modules? And then I have to turn around and go to work and try and convince people who are getting into tech that this stuff is important and they should care about it and they need to pay attention. So it's a weird intersection of a bunch of different perspectives, and I hear from both sides quite a lot. And so in my mind, I have some ideas for how to sort of increase the engagement in the existing training utilities. My talk today, I'm not talking about replacing things like KnowBe4 or other phishing campaigns or utilities. I'm more interested in increasing engagement with those existing tools and improving the roles that those already play in our organizations. So to start off with, a good chunk of our users who take the cybersecurity training probably don't really care about it. And the subset who do probably already know all of the stuff that we're trying to teach them, right? The example of, I mentioned my wife will come home from work one day and talk about taking a security training module that is just a bunch of stuff that I talk to her about all of the time. So she's not gaining anything from spending her day doing that training. She already knows about it. You guys probably have people like this in your organizations, your power users or your super users, the people who aren't necessarily in a tech role, but know a little bit about this stuff. They follow security news in their free time. They have a bit of a background with this sort of thing. When I did support, these were the people where I would call when I was offsite and say, hey, I need you to go reboot a printer for me or reconfigure something simple. The people you can trust to go do something because they have a little bit of a technical background that the rest of your user base doesn't. Our cybersecurity training is probably not super useful for that subset of users. Everybody else tends to fall into the other category. These are our users who need this training for whatever reason, whether it's they work in a critical role where they're the target of like phishing campaigns or phishing emails at a higher rate than somebody else, or they're customer facing or whatever it is. These are the folks who need this training to be applicable. And these are the ones who, in general, it's lost. It's not absorbed for whatever reason. These are kind of the people that make up the rest of our user base. And if we compare them to that first group, or users who have some existing knowledge or already know a little bit about what we're talking about, versus the users who don't, we can pretty easily come up with a rough idea of who in our user base is our training being effective for. And that is a pretty small group of people, right? The group of people who are going to listen to your training and find it useful and understand what your point is or what you're driving at. Probably not a huge portion of your user base. And so our goal, and what I want to talk a little bit about, is how to increase this overlap. How do we push these two groups together a little bit? How do we make it so the people in the green circle start to become the people in the yellow circle a little bit more? To do that, the first question is, why does that green circle even exist? Why is it that existing cybersecurity training and existing modules are not taken seriously by our users? think there's a few reasons for this from my perspective. This type of training tends to be mandatory, and people don't like things that are mandatory. Tends to be generalized, which is exactly the type of thing that people forget about as soon as they're done with it. And culturally, this is the type of stuff that's generally considered kind of pointless. It's the thing your boss tells you have to do, so you do it, and then you're done with it. So things that are mandatory are things that, generally speaking, people put in the bare minimum. They do it because they have to. They have to check the box. You get the email, hey, there's some cybersecurity training you have to do because it's Cybersecurity Awareness Month. And then you go, okay, fine, I guess I'll do this. You click, 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 and then you're done because you don't want to get emails about it anymore. You don't want your boss to bug you about it anymore. Our students do this all the time. Students here at NAIT are required to do an academic integrity training module in order to get their credits. And I can speak from experience that they go in and they click all of the boxes that say that they understand they are not allowed to copy things without giving credit. They are not allowed to do unsighted work or anything like that. And then 6 weeks into the semester, I have to pull the student aside and say, hey, why did you plagiarize this? And they go, well, I didn't know I couldn't, because they forgot about the training that was mandatory. The other thing that happens with mandatory training is it is always at the worst time. It does not matter what time it happens. It was the worst time. And you hear people talk about this all the time. I'm not going to do my training. I'm about to go on vacation. Why would I take time out of my day when I'm getting ready to do this training? Or I just got back from vacation. I have so much stuff I need to catch up on. Why would I do the training? Or we're about to start the busiest time of the year. I don't have time to do my training. Or we just ended the busiest time of year. I need a break. I'm not going to do my training. It doesn't really matter if mandatory training comes out at a bad time. It's the worst time. Doesn't really matter what time of year it is. The other thing is that training tends to be generalized, especially if we're using the modules that are built into things like Know Before. They come full of examples that are sort of canned, I guess, and pre-built scenarios that for some people is pretty hard to relate to. If you're sitting in a training module and you work in the education space, and all of the examples in the training module are talking about healthcare data, that's pretty hard to relate to your day-to-day job. And for the average user, they're just going to not really pay attention or do the work of the lateral thinking for how does this apply to this type of stuff that I see in my day-to-day interactions. Which is understandable, because then what happens is an instant comes up where they do need that training, and it doesn't come to mind because when they think back to their security training, they've been thinking about healthcare data, and they're working in the education space, right? So it's easy to forget after the fact. And then lastly, this is more of a cultural thing. A lot of this training is sort of considered pointless to end users because they don't really understand what it is or why it's important or the role that it fills in their sort of day-to-day. They know that IT is making them do it. They're getting emails about having to do this thing, and they're getting alerts about it if they don't, and their boss is on them because they have to check the box. But there's not really a lot of understanding in the background as to why this stuff is important. The other thing that happens, especially for IT departments that have been around for a while, is that sort of culturally you get into these situations where IT and the average sort of user or the user base tend to kind of butt heads with one another a little bit, right? Culturally, your users think of IT as this group who comes down from on high and decrees that a new policy is going to take effect and changes a rule or the way that some function works, and then they disappear. And now your users have a different way that they have to go about doing their job. And that's frustrating, especially if there's not really any reason given as to why that change was made. And with time, this develops a culture where your users just don't really trust that IT knows what they're doing. And then you lead to situations like when you visit your family, they complain about their IT department to you all the time. I'm going to talk about phishing campaigns a little bit because that sort of culture of mistrust leads to a situation where things like Know Before and things like phishing campaigns generate a huge amount of distrust in your user base. I have a story of somebody in my personal life came to me once complaining about a phishing email their IT department sent out. This was generated by an internal team as part of a sanctioned Know Before phishing campaign. And the subject of the email had something to do with an issue with payroll. And of course, the person clicked on the link because they have a mortgage, they have bills to pay. They want to make sure they're getting paid properly. And then they find out, they get a big screen that says, you fell for it. Time to go do more training. That is not exactly generating a huge amount of trust, right? Because that person didn't really understand the point of that interaction or why their IT department would cross that line. I think everybody in this room knows that that's a pretty good phishing email. That is the type of thing that an attacker would absolutely send out if they had access to it. But the average person might not really understand that context, right? So this creates a culture where it is viewed as IT trying to trick you into doing more training. And I've seen this here at Nate. Maybe I shouldn't admit this, but I've seen this here at Nate, where Nate starts up a new Know Before campaign, and a message goes out into the big group chat with all the instructors that says, "Hey, everybody, watch out! Nate's trying to trick you again. Don't click on any links in your emails." Which you can understand why a user might do that, but it kind of defeats the point of the training if people are just not going to do anything with it, right? And so over time, this builds into this us versus them culture. As IT and in the security world, we kind of forget that users tend to be stakeholders too. They want to be able to do their jobs. They don't really want us coming in, telling them what they do or do not have to do, and then disappearing and leaving them to feel like they have to clean up the mess and pick up the pieces. That's not what we want. So how do we fix that? I've suggested there's a bunch of problems with this and the way we kind of do this training now. How do we actually resolve those problems? One of the biggest ways to do this, and I do this in my classrooms all the time, is to provide the why. Why are we doing something? Why do your users have to sit through this training module? Why do they have to do this particular piece of training? Why is it that we're running phishing campaigns? Just taking a moment to give some reasoning to your users behind why it is that you're doing what you're doing can help people understand huge amounts of the reasoning behind some of this training. One of the biggest ways to increase this buy-in too is to make sure that there is some context that's relevant to your users' day-to-day situation. So the example I gave of your Know Before training being full of healthcare examples, you're giving that to somebody working in the education space, that's something you can change without an enormous amount of work, right? There are examples from every industry of cybersecurity issues or violations or breaches or whatever. You can find an example for the industry that your users are working in, and you can provide that to them. You can give them an example. Hey, here's an example of in the education space of a breach that occurred because of whatever. Give them some context to why the training matters and what happens if they don't do it properly. And we do this in class all the time with students, especially when they're learning something new. I can stand in front of a room of students and I can lecture about, the Linux command line for an hour and a half, but without being able to relate that to something they do day to day, nobody's going to listen to me because they don't understand why it matters, right? The other thing that helps a ton with trying to get these messages across is helping to stay informal, especially if you're working in a culture that is already like an us versus them environment. Your users will not trust your IT department and they just won't listen to you. And that kind of sucks too. And the way to combat that, one of the best ways to combat that is to avoid being seen as an authority, making decrees down to people who don't really want to listen, but trying to stay informal about whatever it is that you're trying to get across, why your training is important, what an example means to you or your industry, whatever it is. Maybe I shouldn't admit this, but I'm sure I'm not the only one in this room. Sometimes I'm sitting in a meeting and my boss tells me some piece of information and I write it down and I say, that's important. I have to look that up later. And then I forget about it. Because it's something that came up in a meeting and there's so much other stuff to worry about. And then you're sitting in the lunchroom talking to some coworkers and somebody says, hey, did you hear about that policy change that's going to mean X, Y, Z for our day to day? And I go, oh, right, I was going to look into that and forgot. Especially if there is a distrust in authority, people tend to trust their coworkers more than their management structure a little bit. And so if you can present new information in a way that's informal, tends to carry a little bit more value. Of course, this is generalizing a little bit, but in my experience and from what I've heard from my students and other folks, tends to hold true, generally speaking. So I have a couple examples I want to go through of uh, examples of how to sort of build some trust in your IT department, and some examples of what I'm talking about today. We all heard about the CrowdStrike issues that happened over the summer. I had a family member who came to me after this event, frustrated that their company had been down for as long as they had been. And he didn't understand why. Didn't understand what had happened or what had occurred. They'd been at a standstill for like 6 days or something like that. And he was just angry that he couldn't get any work done. And so I asked him, hasn't your IT department at least sent you one email explaining everything? And he goes, no, we haven't heard anything. We were just told we're down and we're working on it. So, okay. So he took a second. And I kind of explained to this person, CrowdStrike is a thing that does work in the background that you don't really see day to day, but it tends to be pretty important for server operations, especially for large organizations. CrowdStrike pushed a bad update, and it caused a bunch of servers to crash, and nobody really had any control over that. And unfortunately, the fix for that tends to be fairly manual. Your IT team has to go in one server at a time and reset the update. And there's nothing anybody can really do about that being sort of slow, depending on how complicated your environment is. And his family member kind of paused and looked at me and said, that's good to know that they're not just sitting around on their asses doing nothing. Well, nobody can do any work. The reason I bring this up is because in my mind, if I was working in the IT department at this organization, that's a really easy win to get some buy-in from my staff. That's one email. Hey, everybody, just so you know, the software we rely on has had an issue outside of our control. The fix is a really manual process, and it's going to take some time, but we're working around the clock. And if you have any questions, you can reach out to us at whatever email address. And maybe that's not a perfect fix. Maybe that's not going to solve everybody's frustrations, but at least you're communicating and you're trying to be open with your users to help them understand why something is happening or why an event has occurred. There's another example. I'm not going to name any names, but in the news a little while ago, an educational institution in the area lost a bit of money because of a phishing attack. Basically, what had happened was somebody had sent some emails to the accounting department of this institute claiming to be a vendor that they had been working with, asking to change some account numbers. The person in the accounting department did it. They said, yep, you sound trustworthy, changed a bunch of account numbers, and the next 3 or 4 payments went to this scammer instead of to the actual vendor. Something like $10 million was lost over the course of a couple of months, and it wasn't caught until the vendor called and said, hey, where's our money? Kicked off a whole investigation, and eventually this was discovered. Could have been caught pretty easily by whoever took that call or took that email, doing just a little bit of independent work to verify that you are who you say you are, right? And again, the reason I bring this up, this is a really simple example that you could explain to your users if you work in that sort of space. If they are in an accounting department somewhere, they deal with accounts payable at all. Here's a really simple case of somebody didn't check. They didn't do their due diligence. It would have taken 30 seconds to make a phone call. End result was $10 million lost. So that's what I mean by specific examples, the actions that the user could have taken and the consequences of them not taking those actions. And this works for other areas as well. Like I said, there are tons of examples for whatever industry you work in, being able to find a security incident or a violation or a scam or whatever affecting the industry that you work in, being able to relate that to your users. The other thing that we can do to help foster our security culture is to kind of leverage that other circle. So I talked a little bit about your power users existing in your environment, already having a bit of an understanding of some of the security stuff and caring about this stuff sort of intrinsically. And if you can build a culture where those people feel empowered to discuss security issues with their coworkers, that helps foster your security culture in a way that is a lot more natural, more of a grassroots movement than management coming down and telling people how they have to do things. So if you can find ways to do that, encourage and empower your users to bring up this stuff in a way that is informal, just in passing, instead of it coming down from management or whatever it is, that can be a huge win to help develop your security culture. And in this way, especially again, if your users are sort of mistrusting of their IT department, this is something coming from somebody they work with every day, somebody they trust, instead of, Jim in IT has decreed that so it shall be. And this can be simple little things, right? Somebody can say, hey, I noticed you have your passwords on a sticky note taped to your monitor. It's not a great idea. I get that, we change them a lot, but you could at least hide them under your keyboard or something like that, right? Like baby steps coming from somebody that your users trust instead of from IT coming through and tearing passwords off of screens or whatever. Obviously, we don't want to turn this into the sort of security policing. You don't want your users going around and pointing fingers and saying, hey, I saw you plug that USB in, I'm going to report you to IT. That is kind of the opposite situation we want to build as well. So this is about striking a balance, but being able to empower your users to power users to help build the security culture can be a huge step that you can kind of just let happen in the background as well. And then lastly, we want to try and build trust in know before. You want to give your users context to what this tool is and why we use it and the role that it plays in our sort of larger security training and security materials. Know before is not a secret anymore. When I was doing support, it was just starting to become a thing. There was a bit of an attitude that we wanted to kind of surprise users with this, right? You want to send out a phishing campaign and hope that nobody's paying attention and catch somebody off guard with an email that they were not expecting. And that's just not really the case anymore. People know what this thing is. They know that IT departments are using it. There are messages sent in Slack groups or teams about the fact that there are phishing campaigns going on. It's not a secret weapon that we have in our back pocket anymore. So why not tell your users about it? Why not take a bit of time and say, hey, this is a tool that we use. It's part of our cybersecurity training. It's to ensure that the training we have been provided is actually being effective and doing the role that we need to. And there are going to be times where we email you about things like payroll issues or HR issues, because that's not a line that an attacker is going to respect. So we want to make sure you're paying attention to that sort of thing. And providing some context about why it is that you're doing these sorts of things, instead of it just being out of nowhere, an email they clicked on and now they have to do some extra training or whatever, right? On top of that, you can always provide examples of real phishing emails. If you get pushback about things like emailing about payroll, things like emailing about HR, you can provide real examples of phishing emails that have passed through your industry. And so this is the type of thing that we're trying to protect against. These are the type of things actual attackers are using to try and to get into networks. This is the type of thing we want you as users to be able to notice and ignore. And they tend to be realistic, and they don't really respect the boundaries that you're expecting us to respect. So there will be times when we kind of push through those limits a little bit, right? And it's all about building trust. It's all about building a sense in your users that they understand why it is that you're doing what you're doing, instead of just trying to get them with a trick or an email or whatever. So, quick little summary here. Cybersecurity training, in general, depending on your culture, tends to be have a negative connotation. It's a thing your users have to do because they're expected to do it, and they want to check the box and not get emails about it anymore. Especially if this is a cultural thing where there's some conflict between your users and your IT. Your users don't really want to trust or listen to an authority that they don't necessarily trust. They don't want to do mandatory training, and they don't understand why it is we use tools like Know Before. So we want to bridge that gap a little bit. We want to sort of bridge the gap between the users we know about this stuff and our own perspective, and the perspective of our users who don't know about this stuff and don't really care. I mean, we want to kind of push those two groups together a little bit more. Working on this from the bottom up builds a grassroots movement. Empowering your users to engage in that security culture helps propagate itself naturally as this becomes more and more common in your environment, instead of it constantly being something that IT pushes from on high. With time, you will help build a security culture that sort of propagates itself. And of course, this cannot be forced. Belief in a strong security culture is the type of thing that is just going to come with time through slow, consistent messaging that is fostered in your user base slowly with consistent examples and extra training or those sort of informal discussions around the water cooler, whatever it is, to help your users believe that this stuff is important and it's the type of thing that affects them and that they have to care about. You can get there by giving your staff context, giving them the reasons why you are doing the things that you're doing, why you're sending phishing emails with the subject line that you sent them with, and why it is that the training that they're doing matters. And some examples from their specific industry about why they should care and what the consequences of not caring are. And tweaking your training modules to be able to do that can go a huge way to increasing that user buy-in. In the short term, at least. Yeah, done a little bit early, but I wanted to say thank you to you guys for coming out. Thank you to BSides for having me, and thank you to Nate for hosting the conference every year. Thank you very much. That's like, not too bad. How are you doing? No, I just had a baby. Oh, congratulations.
I believe some. Do we have any question? Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
So you made the mention of like, great, now I got to do another training when I clicked on a random link. Do you think those retraining sessions are effective? Why or why not? And if not, what would you do instead if a person clicked on a link?
I think that's a great question. And I think it depends on whatever the existing culture is. So if somebody clicks on a link, they're asked to do some extra training, and you are already in a situation where they don't really trust the IT department, or they don't think that this is valuable, then no, I don't think that's doing anything. I think you're just propagating the existing problem by making somebody do something that they don't want to do. That said, if somebody clicks on a link they shouldn't, you have to have some kind of consequence for that, right? And maybe there is a form of, maybe not, here's a training module you have to do, but here's a discussion about why this even happened, why this link showed up in your email, why it is that it's a bad thing that you clicked on this. Why did we send an email trying to get you to click on something about payroll or whatever it is, to help sort of start fostering that improvement towards your security culture. If down the line, when you've done that work and you think the relationship between your IT department and your users is a lot better, then yeah, why not provide some extra context? If you can support it with reasoning and context and sort of your understanding for why it is valuable and why they should be paying attention.
I had a quick question. My name's Troy. Great presentation. Love your insight. Any thoughts on positive reinforcement experience or?
That's a great question. So positive reinforcement for your users, I think that's a great idea. I think that again, if you're at the beginning of this cycle where you've got some conflict between your users and your IT, I think that would be really hard to do, because in my experience, if you try to give somebody who does not like you or does not trust you positive reinforcement, they are not going to see a ton of value in that. So maybe not off of the bat, but once you get a bit more into that process of developing that trust, then absolutely, I think there could be some value to having some kind of positive reinforcement. Off the top of my head, I can't think of any examples of what that might look like. Maybe it's get out of training free card one time for if you click on an email when you shouldn't have. You build up some goodwill, but I definitely think there could be some value in that sort of thing for sure.
Thanks. It was a great presentation. I just have a quick bit of a background. So generally, most very larger enterprises, there's usually a sort of gap between C-suite executives and everyone down. In fact, most times that C-suite executives, they've probably got an EA who's doing all of their day-to-day stuff for them. Now, how do you get C-suite? Because most times usually like security, MFA, all of that is for the rest of the minions, not me. So how do you get C-suite to also realize that it's, what insights do you have to get C-suite to say, okay, it's also important that C-suite have to do this kind of awareness training and they have to champion those courses actually for it to actually trickle down to the rest of the enterprise?
That's a great question, and I can sympathize with that experience of getting your executives to understand whatever it is that you're driving at. I think all of the same ideas apply. I think you need to start by trying to foster this security culture sort of from the ground up. Try to provide context and understanding as to why something is or isn't important. In particular, for breaking into that C-suite, I think there's a ton of value in focusing on one of your executives. If you can get the CIO or the CTO or one person on your side, then we end up in that same situation where people like to listen to their coworkers more than they like to listen to somebody in their management chain. So if you can break into that C-suite on one person, maybe somebody who works in a similar silo to you, and then you can leverage them to help spread your security culture a little bit more naturally. I think that, and then kind of following some of the similar ideas, I think that would be a great way to help foster it. But it's a bit of a problem, right? Stuff like this is for the minions and not for the executives. But I've heard stories of very lucky people who get the CTO on their side, and then they get the approval to, no, everybody does this. It doesn't matter what level you're at. You have to follow the rules too. And with a little bit of work, that buy-in can be huge.
Thank you. That was a great presentation.
Thank you.
At my job now, that's one of the things I do. I run security awareness and stuff like that. So I can totally relate with what you're saying. It's always a challenge getting people to do these trainings, no matter how, you try. I listened to all the points you made, very good points there, and I'm trying to think, okay, what can I do better? And just to piggyback off what he said, you have a situation where some of the C-suite folks, I'm still trying to get them to complete their training. And so that makes it challenging. What are some other recommendations in terms of maybe tools? Because you've said a lot about know before now. Maybe, I don't know if there are some better tools. I've heard people talk about some gamification type, tools, things like that. What are your thoughts around that?
That's a great question. The reason I mentioned Know Before so much is just that's the one I have experience with. I know there are other utilities out there, but this is the one I knew when I was doing support. I think that actually comes back to Troy's question about positive reinforcement a little bit too. And I see that with students in the classroom too. If you tell somebody they have to do something, they'll do it, but they're not going to enjoy doing it. But if you can find a way to provide some reasoning for them, then you get a lot more buy-in. The example of this is in some of my assignments, I give my students an optional bonus question for extra marks on their next exam or whatever sometimes. So yeah, I think sort of gamifying it in some way could be super valuable for breaking into those sections of your business that are a little bit resistant to the training. Unfortunately, my experiences with students and the positive reinforcement is marks and grading and stuff like that. So unfortunately, off the top of my head, I can't come up with a specific example, but that sort of positive reinforcement or that sort of cycle of understanding, I think, is a lot more effective than just telling somebody over and over again that they need to do something because they have to do it. Right? Hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we still have any other question? Okay. Thank you once more, Conis, for this wonderful presentation. Thank you. I gained so much, and I believe everyone as well did. Thank you. And on behalf of the team, I want to present today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Onward help. All right, there we go. Thank you, everyone who has survived till the end of day 2 of BSides Edmonton 2024. So you will be getting an event survey automatically in your email. Same one you got this morning. So whatever email address that came to, we really do appreciate it. We want to hear the good and the bad so that we can keep making each year better. Last year we got feedback we needed more time in between each one of the talks, and we added that. So we always do incorporate your feedback. You can help make the event better. If you don't tell us what you need, we can't do it. All right, so our CTF sponsors this year were NCL, Security Innovation. They actually ran the platforms. We had 2 different CTFs this year. That was new. One was geared more towards people who have not had the experience before, and the other one was geared toward those who had. Then we had prizes provided by TCM Security and Hack5, so we really appreciate that. It kind of makes it a little more fun to compete for those prizes. And the winners of the NCL CTF were, and this is just going to be butchery, and I apologize, Code Glitch 0, Timothy Dalby, and Effortless Admin in first place. Second place was Rick the Vic and Eric Fredrickson. And third place is 4.
Where is 4?
Do we know where 4 is? Are you 4? All right, there we go. Come and get a prize. All right, for the Security Innovation CTF, first place was Zima, Ahmed, and Vivek. We've got second place with Zero Trust and Elias. We've got third place with Triple the Check and Benoit DeForge. And they got their prizes, so we appreciate that. There was also a prize draw for a Lego R2-D2. Chris Wilson and Mount Royal University, you're going to get that in the mail. I am envious. Our gold sponsors this year, which we absolutely could not have had this event without, were Optiv, Zscaler, Palo Alto, and Veeam. Our silver sponsors were MNP Digital, CIPS Alberta, Epic IT Security, Glasshouse Systems, Commvault, Netscope, and Longview. We had Cisco, CGI, and Recorded Future for our bronze sponsors. And InfoSec Map, if you don't know about them, they're a great place to find where the next event you want to go to is. And also, if you got one of the Blinky badges, if you got here early enough, that was done by hackerware.io. And if you were a speaker, we appreciate you making this event possible. Obviously, you all came to see the speakers. That is what makes this an awesome event. Everyone in the community sharing their knowledge with the community. And I left some lorem ipsums in. Please ignore that. And we do have an announcement. We're excited to share that we are now separate as our own nonprofit entity. You should not notice any differences, but we really need to thank ISC Squared for all of their help founding BSides Edmonton and growing us to the point of this record-breaking year. We had 600 people registered for this year. So if it felt a little crowded, that would be the reason why. So this is the biggest BSides Edmonton we have had. Next year, it's probably going to sell out again. So just as a warning, maybe get your tickets before September or sign up to volunteer before September. And thank you so much for everyone who has contributed to this growth, whether you have volunteered, whether you have spoken, whether you have just showed up every single year. You make this community event possible because you are a part of our community. And for 2025, we will see you September 22nd and 23rd here. Surprise, you won't have to learn a new layout. That's kind of convenient. And we are going to have a mailing list. It'll get emailed to you to sign up. We have to figure out exactly how that's going to work, but we can sign you up. You'll find out when the CTF or when the call for papers opens, when CTF is going to be, so you can pre-register when you get here to compete. And if you want to, find out anything about donating to us, any of those things. Oh, we have another. All right. And thank you to the volunteers. So everyone who saw all the blue shirts around, they were keeping our speakers on time. They were making sure you knew where to go. They were cleaning up after everyone. They were setting things up. They were tearing it down. They were making the event run smoothly. And again, lorem ipsum. Oof, I apologize. I need more coffee. Next time, somebody just bring me more coffee. And I believe we have a drawing. Nate?
Nate?
Dama?
Dama.
All right, come on up. Let's do the drawing.
So you must be wondering why Dama was here. One of the reason we are, in collaboration with BSide is just to, promote ourselves, even though Data Management Association chapter doesn't deal with cybersecurity, but it's our way of just collaborating with other associations and chapters. So BSide is one, KIPS is another. So we just like to promote each other's conferences and activities that go on all the time. So one of the things we're doing here today, the reason we're here, thanks to Harvinder, is that we've got a conference coming up end of October. And the draw was one free pass to the conference plus a $50 gift certificate. And I've got the entry form here, our entry forms, and I'm going to get Harvinder to draw, or one of our guests, or somebody do it.
Right.
Nicole, do it.
We're going for the middle.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Hopefully it's legible enough for me to read. And it's
not going to be.
It's Fabian. Does anybody know Fabian? Anyway, it's from Alberta government, I guess, GOV. And so we'll have to get in touch with them. We got an email address, and we'll send that out. I was hoping the person was here, but it doesn't seem like the person is here. So yeah, we're gonna keep this, and we will send out the free gift. Okay.
Woo!
So thank you very much. And lastly, just a round of applause for this young lady, Nicole. She is amazing to work with. All right. So yeah.
Shout out for Nicole. Yeah, she's the backbone of B-side Edmonton. Without her, this event is not kind of possible. So she keep us, everyone, including myself, in line. You making this mistake, kind of fix it. So she's the best project manager, I call her, for the B-side we can ever have. So thank you, Nicole. Yeah. Best vibes.
And with that, reminder, 22nd and 23rd of September, put it on your calendars. We will see you then. Thank you so much for coming.
Home drives. Thank you very much.
Hope to see them again here.
Yeah. Thank you. Any volunteers didn't get their gift card, please come here. I have gift cards for all the volunteers.